Well, welcome everyone to the Spoken Gospel Podcast. Thank you for joining us. We are starting the book of Chronicles today, or for some of you, the books of Chronicles, First and Second Chronicles.
And Second Chronicles.
Seth, how you feeling about this massive, was
Man,
it 65 chapter
It's the
book?
65 chapter black hole in my Bible,
Yeah.
generally. It's like, oh, I come across the 9 chapters of genealogy at the beginning. I'm like, I'm going to skip that.
Move on.
And then I get to the next part, and it's just stories I've already read in 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings.
That's right.
And so I have not done a ton of study about this book. Which
What is this long, genealogy-heavy, repeated storybook doing in my Bible?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And so, not willing to ask that question of myself in my previous my previous readings through the Chronicles, I got to this time, and I'm actually very excited.
Yeah.
My best analogy for what the Book of Chronicles is doing in our Bibles is that it's the Hamilton, the musical.
Like the Lin-Manuel Miranda musical.
Yeah, it's the Hamilton of our Bibles.
I have every question. Explain yourself.
So, first of all, both Chronicles and Hamilton starts off with the genealogy.
Hamilton's is a little more interesting.
His is short, and it's
musical.
And he uses the technical term here, so I'm not swearing, but how does a bastard, orphan, son of a whore, and a Scotsman dropped off at a forgotten spot in the middle of the Caribbean, grew up to be a hero and a scholar?
Yes.
And what's interesting about that genealogy in Hamilton is it gives you who he is, where he's from. He's a nobody from nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
And what he'll become. He'll become a hero and a scholar.
Yep.
And it tells you the entire point of the musical, which is that anybody from anywhere
Can become anything.
in America.
In America.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like an orphan can create a nation.
Right.
And that's the story of Hamilton.
And you get that from this genealogy at the beginning.
And we'll go into deep detail on how the genealogy in Chronicles does the same thing. But it gives us a picture of how Israel came to be, but how Israel should act in the future.
Okay. So is the only way that Hamilton and Chronicles are the same because they both start with the genealogy?
No,
that sets
they're
up themes?
also both. Hamilton's obviously musical, but Chronicles is the book of the Bible that has probably the most references to music, musical instruments, and singing than any other book.
I would have never guessed that.
Yeah, it is. In fact, it's the very center of the genealogy. You have 9 chapters of genealogy.
Oh, okay, yeah.
The very, very center, the center of its chiasm.
Yeah, which for a Hebrew reader is
the most important
thing.
Are priestly singers.
What?
Singers are the most important characters in the book, or some of the most important characters.
Why music and instruments and singing?
So, there's a whole bunch of answers for that.
Is
but
it too early for that question?
Basically, the reason why, it's a little early, but we'll answer it. The
Okay.
reason why is, according to the Book of Chronicles, singing is how you get guidance from God. Over and over again, singers are called prophets.
Whoa.
And singing is called prophecy.
Okay.
And kings rise or fall in Israel based on their response to God's word in the mouth of the prophets, whether or not they ask God for advice and they listen to it. So the very center of the genealogy are all these singing prophets directing the kings of Israel on how they should behave and how they should lead their nation.
That's cool.
And if they fail to do that, their nation falls apart. If they do that, their nation succeeds.
Okay.
So the genealogy tells us how a nation should act.
With prophets singing the direction and word of the Lord at its center.
Yes, and kings listening to it.
Yes,
it will. Yeah.
Okay, we'll
go more in there, but
Okay.
it proves the point of the whole book. It's like, as kings listen to the voice of the Lord, they have success.
Okay. Any other similarities?
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
They're both about a founding father of a nation.
Okay.
So Hamilton's obviously about Alexander Hamilton.
Alexander Hamilton.
That's right.
Yep.
First Chronicles opens with a genealogy, but after the genealogy, all of First Chronicles, the rest of First Chronicles, is about David's rise to power. And so it chronicles the entire rise of power to David, how he becomes king, how he gets a capital city, how he gets a covenant from God, and how he is the ideal king who listens to the voice of God.
Okay. Founding Father David. Great.
And then you get the pinnacle of his reign and his son, Solomon. At the very top of the book is Solomon's reign.
Yeah.
And interestingly, he's the only king who's never critiqued for something he does wrong.
Solomon?
Solomon is.
Oh, strange. He did a lot of things wrong.
Very interesting,
Yeah,
which gets to our next point of similarity between Hamilton
There's more.
and Chronicles, is that they present an idealized vision of Israel's history.
Yeah, First and Second Kings are not idealized at all.
No, they're all the warts and all the bad things
Yeah.
the kings of Israel do are present there.
Yeah, highlighted even.
Yeah, and particularly in David and Solomon.
Mm-hmm.
And David and Solomon are portrayed as the highest points and the highest ideals to which Israel should aspire to be like.
Okay, and how's that similar to Hamilton?
Because similar to Hamilton, in that Hamilton presents an idealized picture, a selection of facts about Alexander Hamilton.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And even the way that like all of the characters are people of color or African American, which is everyone knows that that's George Washington was not a black man.
It's like you have, and they were slave owners.
And they were slave owners.
Yeah.
But they paper over those facts.
Yeah.
Why? Because they're making a different point right now.
Yeah.
That anybody from anywhere can be anyone.
I see. It's
in
an
America.
idealized thing.
It's an idealized picture of America
Yeah.
to prove a point.
And which is like beautiful and really cool.
Right.
Okay.
So you're supposed to look past the things you already know wrong about Solomon and David.
Yeah.
And some of David's failures are included. None of Solomon's are.
Interesting.
Isn't it fascinating? But they want you to focus on the main point.
Yeah.
Solomon is this high picture of a king who listens to God and experiences God's blessing as a result. Who has peace on every side.
Yeah.
He has no enemies. He's wealthy. This is a picture of what a king looks like when they listen to God well.
Okay. Any other similarities? I'm sure there are, but any other big ones?
Yeah, I think the main point is it has a moral point it's making.
Okay.
Right? So like the moral point of Hamilton is like if you put in the hard work,
yes.
you can be
Anything.
you can build a nation.
Right. Work hard.
And you can build a nation.
Yep.
In the book of Chronicles, the message is if you listen to God, God will build your nation for you.
Okay.
And that's
cool.
And that is important because of when Chronicles is written. So 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Samuel were written more than likely while Israel's in exile.
Okay. So after the Assyrians drove out the northern kingdom, the Babylonians drove out the
That's
southern
right.
kingdom of Judah. They're in exile, scattered among the nations.
That's right.
And
this is a product of their sin, right? They failed God.
And they're asking the question, why are we here? Why would God do this to us? And so highlighting the sins of Israel is important because it's like, I understand
why I'm here.
Why I'm
then what happens in the book of Kings over and over again? God shows mercy to people
that you would never expect.
That you would never expect to have mercy to. And what do you need if you're in exile?
Mercy.
You need mercy.
Yeah.
Why is it when Israel's in exile in the book of 1st Kings, and they're reading the story, that you have the first stories of resurrection? Because Israel as a nation has died, and they need the message of resurrection.
Well, that's cool.
Chronicles wasn't written to people in exile. Israel has come back from exile. More than likely, they've rebuilt the temple.
Okay.
They've been in Israel for a little while. And now they're asking the question, well, how do we rebuild our nation? So they're not in exile, they're rebuilding.
I see.
And so the chronicler is writing to a people who are rebuilding and asking really fundamental questions about how to rebuild their nation. Well, how should we do it? We don't want to repeat the sins of the past. So what do we do now? And depending on a couple of people I've read, is like, might have been a sense that as they're rebuilding Israel, that they should abandon a couple of things that were really important to Israel in the past, namely the Davidic line and the temple itself.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because think about it. Why did Judah end up going to exile? Because of a son of David on a throne introducing idolatry into the land.
Right.
So over and over again throughout Israel's history. And what did David do wrong? He slept with Bathsheba, and his failures as a leader then poisoned the rest of Israel's history.
Yeah, shouldn't we give up on this whole son of David thing? Isn't the line of David shot because of all of this?
That's right. It's like God did promise something special to David, but all of David's sons have proved to be less than worthy people to follow, right?
Yeah, it could seem like that.
It could seem like that, and even the temple itself was supposed to provide a level of protection, right? Like if they've prioritized the temple, wasn't it supposed to be something special? Wasn't it supposed to be something magical about that protected them? But they had a temple, and
it failed them.
Yeah. And even in Ezra and Nehemiah, when they rebuilt the temple, what do all the old men do when they see it?
They cry because it wasn't as grand as the one that came before it.
Right. So Israel's rebuilding their nation after spending a long time in exile. They're asking, so by what standards should we rebuild our nation? What stories from our founding fathers should we listen to? Which ones should we ignore? Because the first version of our history did not go so well.
Right.
And so the chronicler's writing to these people, particularly to leaders of people, and he's saying, okay, let me teach you what was good about our founding fathers so that we can copy their successes while avoiding their mistakes.
Oh, that's helpful.
Yeah.
That's the reason for the idealized picture.
That's right. It's like we all know the problems. They're like tempted to throw off these things, perhaps.
Yes.
We know the problems, but what do we know? What good things do we know happened during that time?
Yeah. God has answered the mercy that First and Second Kings cried out for and exampled by bringing us out of exile back into the land, rebuilding the temple, even giving us someone like Zerubbabel possibly and others who are from David's line. Maybe something cool is happening. That's answered. But now, can we trust the line of David? Can we trust the temple? These seem to be a mixed bag in our history. Let's have the chronicler tell the different story, the other side of the coin, and highlight the good things about Israel's history. So we're like, oh, this isn't worth giving up.
That's right.
It is. There is good. There's gold in it, and I can trust it, and I can follow the example of it.
That's right.
Okay, I'm tracking.
Yeah, and so in the message the chronicler is going to give us over and over and over again is that when a son of David centers Israel around the priesthood, God's people are given rest.
Okay.
So that's the big main point.
All right.
Where the son of David centers Israel around the priesthood, God's people get rest.
Okay. Can we drill into those?
Yes, please.
Okay. Because we've talked a lot about the line of David already. And I'm like, okay, some people might be lost just right there.
Okay.
So let's back up. Why is David so important? What is this promise that God made to him? Maybe we rewind and go back to 2 Samuel 7.
Yes.
And kind of talk about some of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like we get that story in Chronicles again.
Okay.
We're given that promise. But essentially the story goes this way. David proves he's a faithful warrior, willing to fight on God's behalf and for Israel. He proved himself better than Saul, who was Israel's first king.
Right.
And when he finally comes to power, he does a whole bunch of really, really great things following God as he's leading. Lots of military victories, a lot of great things. At one point, David wants to build and make permanent God's temple.
Because at that point, it was just a tent. It was the tabernacle, the wilderness tabernacle that was mobile and
and
flimsy.
it was a long way away from the new capital, Jerusalem.
Oh, yes. It was in
Gibeon.
In Gibeon, okay.
And so it's like anytime that David wanted to ask God for advice, it's like a several mile trip, like an all day, multiple day trip, just to ask God for advice.
Okay.
He wants to be a good king. He wants to listen to God more consistently. So he wants to bring God's presence closer to him, to the new center of Israel.
Wants to put the temple by the palace.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
We'll get into some more of those details in a bit. And God basically hears that and says, like, I haven't asked for that, but your heart's right.
Okay.
You want to ask me more frequently, but here's what I'm going to do in response to your good heart. I'm going to make you, David, the forefather of an eternal king.
Yeah.
You will never not have a king on the throne, and he is the person who will build my house for me in Jerusalem and who will rule forever, the earth forever, Jerusalem forever, God's people forever. And so David is given this amazing promise that his line, his dynasty will save the world one day.
That someday one of his sons, presumably even maybe the next son, Solomon would be an eternal king over the whole world.
That's right.
To bring what you said, peace on every side.
That's right. That's right.
So that's what's important about the line of David is that attached to David, there is this huge promise from God that from him there would be an eternal king that would rule forever and everywhere.
Yes.
And Israel's crying out for that to be true because they want peace on every side. They want security. So that's what's attached to the line of David.
That's right.
But then you also said, so someone from the line of David.
Right. And remember, the people Chronicles written to might be tempted to say those promises no longer apply. Because David's line's been so catastrophically sinful.
Yes.
And they were the ones who sent us into exile, right? Wasn't Manasseh on the throne? Wasn't a son of David on the throne?
Right.
That got us sent out of Israel in the first place? Why should he be on the throne?
Yeah.
And the answer is kind of the Book of Kings. Well, God's promised mercy to somebody from David.
Yeah. But then Chronicles is going to come along and add fuel to that and say, also, David wasn't all bad.
He wasn't all bad.
Let's rewind the clock back and
remember our actual history when David was faithful. We had peace.
Yeah.
And we had wealth.
Right.
And
we
God
can
was with
there.
us. Yeah.
Okay. So, son of David, centered around the priests.
Centers Israel around the priesthood.
Okay. Talk to me about that.
So, it might be helpful to just start talking about the genealogy.
Okay.
At this point.
I mean, I've never asked for clarity for something, and then the answer was, great, I can answer that question. Let's talk about a genealogy.
Maybe this won't be helpful.
But I bet you're right.
So the genealogy is, like all genealogies, has a ton of effort and care put into how it's structured.
Yes.
And so this genealogy in the book of Chronicles is a chiasm, or a mountain.
Yep.
It has parallel moments on either side of the genealogy. And at the very, very top is a priesthood.
Okay.
So here's the way the genealogy works. On the outer edges, in chapters 1 and then in chapters 9.
Oh my goodness. It's a long genealogy.
It's a giant, in chapter 1, you have Israel's history before its kingdom. Before there is ever a king, before there's ever a kingdom, you get Israel's history.
Okay.
Chapter 1. At the very end, in chapter 9.
Oh, it starts with Adam.
It starts with Adam, all the way back in the beginning.
You weren't kidding.
No.
Are you just bringing this up because you're the second name?
I am the second
Seth.
name. Adam, Seth. And then chapter 9 is a genealogy of all the people who come back to Israel after exile. So after the kingdom period.
Okay.
So on either end of the genealogy, you got pre and post kingdom people. The next person in the list is the tribe of Judah, which is the kingly tribe that David's from. Okay.
Okay.
And then paralleling that on the other side of the genealogy is the tribe of Benjamin, which is King Saul's line, the first king of Judah. Okay. You with me so far?
And when you say the next in the list, you're saying like the next parallel moment.
Yeah. So you have on either side for our video people, you've got pre and post kingdom.
Right.
Then you've got the line of David and the line of Saul, Israel's first king and the second king.
Okay. Then
you have all the other tribes,
yep.
genealogies, names of all the other tribes, and at the very, very top, you have the priesthood.
Is that the tribe of Levi?
The tribe of Levi.
Yep. That makes sense.
Yep. And then in the middle of Levi, you have the singers.
Okay.
The singers.
That makes a ton of sense.
Right?
Yep.
And so